Sleep, one of the things that we haven't spoken about. What are the most important strategy? There's so much to do on sleep. Sleep, actually, one of the few places that doesn't seem to be too tribal. Like just sleep more. Maybe some people will argue whether you need to have magnesium L-threonate or activated charcoal or whatever. What are the most important strategies when it comes to sleep quality?
Probably regularity of schedule. So, the closer you can be to going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, that's great. Duration, so leaving room to sleep for a sufficient duration. So, in other words, you can do everything right, but if you're only going to give yourself 6 hours from the minute you get into bed until you have to be brushing your teeth in the morning, you're only going to get so far. Then there's obviously the hygiene that goes into sleep. So temperature, darkness, and stimulation before sleep. So what are you doing to get your brain ready to sleep? Again, I always remind people there's sort of 3 factors that are driving this, right? So you want adenosine to be climbing as high as possible. You want melatonin to be climbing as high as possible. And you want cortisol to be plunging as much as possible. So what do you have to do to make those things true? So to make adenosine go up, you have to be active. Right? Like adenosine is the byproduct of activity. So the more active you are during the day, the more your adenosine levels go up. And then you have to put that down, right? That's a sleep signal. Melatonin is driven by light, but again, you have to have the right circadian rhythm. So you have to be getting the right time and doing it at the same time over and over, which is why when I was talking about my travel schedule, I have to force exogenous melatonin into the equation because I can't rely on the external cues. But that's why I don't want people taking melatonin regularly. I want them relying on the natural way to get it. And then cortisol is probably the hardest one for most of us, even if because the typical biohacker gets number 1 and 2, but we're sort of missing number 3, which is how do I actually get my adrenal glands to come down to let me actually go to sleep? And that's the one where, again, you can do it sort of with a pharmacologic or molecular hammer, which is what phosphatidylserine is doing. But again, I don't really want to have to rely on that every single night. Instead, I want to get into a habit of, for 2 hours before bed, not engaging in anything that's going to be stressful to me. So I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not, chirping on work emails and looking at things that are, I'm really kind of trying to be doing very little that would produce. And if I am doing some work, I'm not going to suggest, I'll never look at my computer for 2 hours. That what am I going to do? I'm going to do something that's a little more relaxing, or I'm going to, watch some F1 highlights or something like that. That's just pure bliss, but is not going to increase my level of stress. And then we've talked about some of the supplements, obviously, that you can take there. There are different chronotypes of sleep. There are some people who are truly night owls, and they're really not meant to go to bed until 12 or 1 o'clock. And they really need to be getting up at 7 or 8 o'clock. And if you force that person to go to bed at 10 because their spouse goes to bed at 10, they might really struggle to get to sleep. And there's a term for that when spouses are on the different chronotype. I forget the name of the term, but
unhappiness.
Yeah. I would also look to make sure, believe it or not, that a person isn't overslept. So this is not an entirely improbable scenario where you see somebody who is sleeping too much. They have too much time in bed, and therefore they aren't building up enough. They take a nap during the day or something like that, and they haven't built up enough sleep pressure. And so they're having a hard time going to bed. Of course, you also want to rule out things like caffeine. Caffeine inhibits adenosine, by the way. It inhibits the adenosine receptor. So that's how, for someone who's not like me, caffeine is a wakefulness compound. So those are the other things I'd be looking through on the checklist on, is making sure when was the last caffeine. Especially if you're caffeine sensitive, the half-life is actually quite long.
9 hours?
Yeah, I think it's about 10, but yeah, it's long enough that you can easily get into trouble with it.
And what about if you're finding yourself waking up throughout the night? Is that just the same?
Well, no, I think that the question is, why are you waking up? Because you have to pee. Then if that's the issue, then what do you do? Why is that happening? If you're waking up and you're ruminating, honestly, I think the best tool for that is CBTI. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, very powerful tool. And then there's a whole set of behaviors around that, right? So what do you do? When should you get up and out and disengage from sleep altogether? When should you try to go back to sleep? And so we're very liberal in our use of CBTI with patients who are struggling with that.